That's all. I don't have a question.
Any question from anyone before Mr. Asitanga continues? Okay, in the absence of questions, I think Mr. Asitanga, please continue.
Okay, so we just looked at the first part of your literature review. Okay, but what I mostly do not like people to do is to caption it as conceptual framework. At the back of your mind, you know you are doing a conceptual analysis, but you don't necessarily need to caption it there. You see, the three categorizations that I gave you is for you to know or have at the back of your mind what goes into each of the segments, or which segments actually go into the literature review. So it is not really necessary for you to write, okay, 2.1 conceptual framework. No, because all these things brought together are a literature review, right? So you don't need to actually segment it. The only segmentation you can do is with regards to the subtopic. So maybe the first one will be looking at the concept of social media, maybe relevance of social media to academic performance. Maybe you come to academic performance, indicators of academic performance, all of those things are there. Then you come to the next part, which is review of related literature. Here, I must sound a word of caution. You are using empirical studies. There's a difference between the kind of literature you use in your empirical framework and the literature you use in your conceptual framework. Now, the conceptual framework, like I said initially, is just to explain the concepts that are actually involved in your study, the various concepts in your study. But the empirical framework is to look at actual studies that have been done with certain primary data that have been undercovered by virtue of they going on the field to collect or harvest data, and how those findings speak to major issues in your research work. That is what a review of related literature means. Now, we call it review of related literature. Related here means that you are putting them in themes so that you are actually able to tell us how those studies are related. That is why initially I told you that the downloading and the organization of the literature should be in relation to your research objectives. So you know that, okay, out of all the literature I downloaded, 5 of them speak to objective 1. So if you are actually reviewing the literature, you can be able to put them under that particular subtopic in your objective 1. Then you can have other subtopics again under the same objective 1 for those particular sets of literature. Then you do the same for objective 2. You do the same for objective 3. Now, this is very important. I don't know who can tell me this, but this is very important because, in your chapter 1, you stated the research objectives, which informed the research questions. Now, the research questions are supposed to be answered by the data you'll be collecting on the field, whether through qualitative means, through quantitative means, or through the mixed method approach. Now, the data you collect should be used to answer the research questions which were developed from your research objectives. Now, you do not just answer the questions, you also need to discuss them by looking at what other relevant studies have also produced in the same area. So this is where the categorization of your empirical review according to your research objectives is very, very important, so that it makes the discussion very, very easy for you in your chapter 4. So in your chapter 4, you know that, okay, when I'm coming to discuss research objective 1, I just go to my chapter 2 and look at all the literature I reviewed for research objective 1. All you need to do then is to compare their findings with your findings. Where your findings actually justify other people's findings, you state it. Where your findings actually debunk other people's findings, you state it. So this is why the empirical review is very, very important. That way, you will know exactly, through your discussion, you will know exactly how your study is contributing to existing knowledge. Is it actually contributing in a positive way by expanding the knowledge in that particular area, by saying that, okay, this person's findings are true because your findings reveal the same thing? Or is it going to speak to certain changes? Because obviously, the way things are this year were not the same way things were last year. The way things were in 1992 are not the same as the way things are now. So a research work around social media and academic performance in 1992 may not necessarily be the same as the impact of social media on academic performance now. Currently, because of COVID and all of those things, there are people who believe that social media is actually a good thing for academic performance. But until COVID, there were a lot of arguments against the use of social media. You even go to class and your lecturers and your teachers are against you using phones. But today, the world is actually dependent on the use of social media, technologies, and phones. So you see, your findings or your research is supposed to build on existing knowledge. So it is in your empirical framework, that is where you discuss the knowledge that exists, and you actually do them in accordance with your research objectives. Okay, now the question I want to sound here is that there's a particular limitation as to the literature you are supposed to use. Because these deal with primary findings, you shouldn't use literature that are older than 10 years from the time you are conducting the study. So we are in 2021. So at most, the oldest study you are supposed to use for that part of your literature review should not be older than 2011. So it means that you should only consider studies from 2011 to 2021 for your empirical review. Please, I hope you understand. Then after you download all these studies, you simply organize them in accordance with your research objectives. Now let's come to how to review the literature. So you finish downloading, we are assuming you finished downloading, you've gotten the right amount of literature. Mostly I advise that you review about 5 literature in relation to each objective. So research objective 1 should have 5 literature you are going to review there. Objective 2 should have 5. Objective 3 should also have 5. That way, I initially said that the more literature you review, the stronger your work becomes, because you then have a lot of justification for your research, right? So let's assume you've been able to download the literature. How do you go about the reviewing? Now, there are 3 things to take note of in reviewing your literature. So let's say you pick a particular literature, literature 1, you want to read it, you want to review it. How do you go about writing or drafting your literature review? There are 3 things you need to be on the lookout for. Now, first off is the aim of the paper. The aim of the paper. So whichever paper you are reviewing, and this is specific to the empirical review, not to the conceptual. Now, what is the main aim of the paper that you are reviewing? Okay, Dominic Asitanga 2019 sought to examine the relationship between increased social media use and academic performance among college students in the United States of America. That is the aim of the paper, right? Now, the next thing to look at is the thesis of the paper. Thesis simply means the arguments, the core arguments of the paper. So the entirety of the literature, what was that singular thing the person was trying to say? Okay, so if the person was looking at the relationship between increased social media use and academic performance, what did the person conclude at the end of the day? That is a thesis. So did increased social media use result in high academic performance or low academic performance? That is a thesis. Now, the third part is the practical or the evidence to support the person's thesis. What evidence did the person produce? Now, this is where you look at the findings of the person that actually justifies why he thinks that increased social media use affect academic performance in a negative manner. So this is how you go about your review of literature. You look at the aim of the person's paper, the core thesis of the person's paper, and the empirical justification that the person provided for their paper. Now, let's assume you are doing the review in relation to objective 1. Now, you start from the oldest paper to the youngest one. So let's say in your objective 1, you are starting the review from a paper that was in 2012, and you have another paper that was in 2020, and you have another paper that was written in 2018. You need to start with the 2012 one first before you move on to the one that was written in 2018. Then you come to the one that was written in 2019. Remember, in the beginning, I said research is a progression of knowledge. So you don't start reviewing a paper that was written in 2019. Then at the latter part of your review, you come back and tell me what happened in a study that was done in 2012. You are not being, very, very, articulate, or you are not actually being very, very, whichever word you like to put there. So you start with the oldest paper before coming to the recent paper, and you make sure that you actually link the results together. So the findings that are similar, or if you realize that, okay, the next study's findings actually agrees with the previous study, you state it as such, so that when we are reading, we know that, okay, there is a relationship between the two studies such that, okay, the next study refutes the claims of the first study, or the first study has findings that are buttressed or that are re-echoed by the next study. So this is how you go about the drafting. Now, there are certain words you use in order to drive home what the researcher was trying to say. So you can use words like assert, indicate, state, submit. So let's say Opoku 2019 submit that. Remedy 2018 asserts that. SAAKA 2017 argues that. Now let me sound this note of caution. The word argues is only used in your empirical review. You do not use the word argue in your conceptual review. You only argue once you have data. And the part of your review that uses data is the empirical review. So basically, this is how you go about the drafting of the review. Make sure you have good storytelling skills, because you need to weave the results. You need to write it in a way that anyone who picks it up would want to read, okay? You need to have good summary skills, because you are summarizing someone's 80, 100, 150-page thesis to just a paragraph. So you must know how to use very concise and precise terms, and you should know how to fish out or tease out the most important elements of the person's work in a way that actually brings a lot of understanding and clarity to your work. And you do so for each of the segments that you have under the empirical review part. Now, there are a number of tools available for you to use. We have what we call paraphrasing. Okay, you can paraphrase. Now, paraphrasing means that the person has stated something in his work, and you are stating it in your own words, using your own understanding. Basically, that is what it is. So it means that you are not quoting the person directly. And this is very, very important, because I'll be getting to the issue of plagiarism later, and you realize that mostly issues of plagiarism, happen in your literature review, because a lot of people, because of how difficult it is to write a literature review, you find them copying and pasting, which is academic theft, academic dishonesty. So there are certain tools to use in order to avoid plagiarism. And the first one is what I've stated, paraphrasing, quoting the person using your own understanding, but doing so without changing the meaning that the person was trying to drive across. So if the person says, Amina was knocked down by a car, if you want to rephrase it, the idea should be there that a girl called Amina was knocked down by a car. You don't rephrase it to change the context of what the person was saying, you don't do that, right? Now, paraphrasing alone throughout your analysis or your literature review will make your work too monotonous. Sometimes variety is appreciated. So in order to use variety, you can also adopt this other skill called direct quotation or quoting people verbatim. Now in quoting verbatim, you need to make use of the quotation marks. That's where you put it in quotation marks. So you only use the quotation marks if you are trying to state something in a very direct and proportionate manner. What you want to state from the person's work is something that you want directly quoted in the person's words. So these are the two tools. Please, are there any questions at this point?
Yes. So are there any questions, please? We are heading towards almost the end of the class. And, if you have any questions so far, you have spoken a lot. We are very grateful, Mr. Dominic Asitanga, for your time and the knowledge that you're sharing with us. Any questions so far? He has reviewed some very important tips on how to, some of us, when it gets to the literature review, we struggle a lot, but with this insight, we can navigate the literature review a lot easier than we did before. Some of the problems he mentioned, I for one, when I was, he was actually my supervisor for my diploma project. Okay, so Vincent, your hand is up.
Thank you very much.
Vincent, your voice is very low.
I'm going to continue.
Vincent.
Yes, better than my network.
Yeah, your network is a bit bad. Can you reposition?
I may have to type. You can
Good.
go on. I'll type.
It's good. We can hear you.
Then you have to type.
Okay, so thank you very much, Mr. Dominic, and I want to know, you said we shouldn't have to put it like, so this is a conceptual framework, theoretical framework. That you are not.
Vincent, I think you'd have to type. Please type the question, and Mr. Asitanga would.
Yeah, let me conclude. Since we would want to finish by. So I would like to end on a literature review, and maybe we can make time another time to discuss the other chapters.
Yes.
So I've spoken extensively about the empirical review because that is like the central focus of the literature review, because your whole discussion, your findings will be predicated on your empirical review. Now, the last part of the literature review is your theoretical framework, which is also a very important area. Now, the theoretical framework is the section where you talk about the theories that you are going to use in your study. Now, the beneficiaries of your study will be human beings. The same way they are the subject of your study, they are those you want to get information from. So definitely theories have been espoused over time to explain how people behave in a given situation. So since the research are predominantly communication related, you have so many communication theories available. So in order to have a foresight into how humans will behave within the context of the study, you need to actually undergird or let your study be underscored by a set of theories. That is how important a theoretical framework is. Now, let me make this very clear. Your choice of theory is not dependent on what theory you think is right. So maybe, okay, I want to look at the impact of telenovelas on marriages. Yeah, okay, I'll use agenda setting theory. No, it is actually a wrong approach. Granted, you are good students, you've been taught a whole lot of theories, you should be able to know which theory to use in which instance. In research, the case is totally different. Now, the choice of theory should be dependent on how similar studies or which theories similar studies equally used. So if you are using agenda setting theory for your study, it should be because other similar studies use the agenda setting theory. If you are using the uses and gratification theories for your study, it should be because another person also used that particular theory and that theory did well for his study. Now, the theoretical framework serves two purposes. The first purpose is that it is supposed to guide you in terms of letting you have a foresight into what to expect or the kind of data to get. The second part is that the theoretical framework should either be, supported or criticized by your findings. What it means is that your findings should contribute towards refining the theory. So what are the findings of your study saying? What do the findings of your study mean for the theory? Does it actually contribute to the agenda setting theory? Does it actually, contribute to the debate about agenda setting being a relevant theory? Or does it debunk most of the core assumptions of the theory? This is how important your theoretical framework is. Now let's come to how to draft that particular section of your literature review. Now, in drafting the theoretical framework, you first need to start telling us who the propounder of the theory was and the historical development of the theory. Just like Isaac Newton, who was bathing in the shower and whatever. Tell us how those theories came about, right? Now, after telling us how those theories came about, every theory has what we call the core assumptions. It means that the theories are mostly summarized into statements that seek to explain how human beings would behave in those given contexts. So what are the core assumptions of the theory? Okay, and how relevant is the theory to your study? Now, and that part is where the importance lies. So in articulating the relevance of the theory to your study, that is where you need to examine how other studies have used that theory. Of course, other relevant studies to your area. You don't quote studies that were done in a different jurisdiction while your study is looking at social media and academic performance. It should be a related study. So this related study used this same theory, and the person's findings went ahead to, let's say, contribute significantly to the understanding of that theory. So you feel the use of that theory will mean a lot for your research work. That is how you actually go about the drafting. So the promulgator of the theory or the propounder of the theory, the historical development of the theory, if there's any, the core assumptions of the theory and how those core assumptions relate with the theory, and a review of studies that have used that theory and what the findings of the study meant for the use of that theory. Then the last part of your literature review is your conclusion. So an introduction and a conclusion. This chapter seeks to examine important literature in relation to social media and academic performance. This chapter first begins by discussing important concepts like social media, like academic performance, narrows in on reviewing empirical studies that are related to the study, and concludes by examining the theoretical framework that would underpin the study. That's your introduction. Then you start. 2.1, social media. 2.2, academic performance. 2.3, role of social media in academics, or role of social media in academics, whatever. Then maybe 2.4, review of empirical literature. Then you put them in themes. 2.5, then you have your theoretical framework. Now, I advise that at your stage, you need two theories to write your theoretical framework. So if you are not done with your literature review yet, you may have to want to review it by looking at two theories that, are related to the area under discussion. So this is how you go about your literature review. It sounds simple, but it actually takes a lot of time. Even as experienced as I am, I don't use less than a week to draft a literature review. It's mostly within 5 days to a week. So you can imagine for novel students like you, it will probably take a lot of time. So the key point is that you need to read as many literature as you possibly can and be as analytical as possible. And while you are analyzing, do not forget your storytelling skills, because you are telling stories using people's research works. So you should be very creative and innovative in how you bring these pieces together to tell a compelling story. Thank you very much. Are there any questions, please? Hello?
Yes.
Mr. Yeah, please. I think I'm done with the literature review, unless there are questions.
Are there any questions? Yeah, Vincent says his question has been answered. Okay. Anybody else with a question or a problem concerning literature review or the chapter 1? Alex, please, you have any question? You've been on for a while. Mr. Kunde Alex.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes, senior. Sorry, come again. I didn't get what you said.
Please, you have any questions?
Not really.
Okay.
Can you hear me? I'm on a move, so
okay.
I'm too sure if I want to speak up this year. I'm moving.
Okay, Gifty, any questions? Gifty.
No, please.
Okay.
No questions.
Okay, Eugenia. Eugenia. Obed.
Yeah.
Obed, Alberta. Eunice, Habib. Any questions?
I mean, the list is full of sharks, so.
It seems we have a lot of sharks on our hands today. You know, easy cry. Easy cry. One time.
They understood the one time.
Yeah, hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hello,
yes.
senior.
Yes, Kwabena, we can hear you.
Can you hear me?
The one.
Hello.
Yeah, we can hear you. Who is speaking? Alex?
Hello.
Yeah, we can hear
Alex Kunde.
Yeah, Mr.
Yes,
Alex.
I wanted him to throw more light on how one can link the importance of the theory to the topic in question.
Okay. Unfortunately, we are facing a power crisis, so I would have to use torchlight instead of actual light, but that was just by the way. I stated that in the concluding part. So you actually talk about how, other studies have used, other similar studies have used that particular theory in question, and what their findings meant for the theory, or what the theory meant for their findings. You can also look at the core assumptions of the theory and relate it to your study. You understand? The core assumptions of the theory, and you simply relate it to your studies, okay, basically. So let me give you a good example. So with the topic that we were looking at, the impact of social media on academic performance, one of the widely used theories is the uses and gratification theory. The basic underlying principle for that theory is that people used media for different reasons, okay? So how is this related to the study? Now, the advances of that theory argue that there are people who seek different gratifications and uses from the media. Gratification simply means satisfaction. So what I may use media for may be different from what you may use media for. So there is no cut across use, or there is no template defines how people should use a particular medium. Now, that particular theory becomes relevant to my study because social media is a kind of medium, right? If you're looking at media, social media is a kind of media. And, just like a kind of media, the core assumptions of the uses and gratification theory becomes relevant because just like TV and radio, social media has uses and gratification, and the users are individual specific, okay? So that is the core assumption of the theory, and I've been able to relate the core assumptions of the theory to my study because my study is equally looking at how students use social media and how their use of social media, whether for entertainment or academic purposes, affects their academic performance. So in order to know how social media affects their academic performance, I'll first need to know exactly what they use social media for and the kind of amount of time they use on social media. Then I'll then buttress it by looking at other studies that have used the uses and gratification theory in trying to assess the impact of social media on academic performance. In order to make a lot of, to make a case for why I'm trying to use that theory in my study. So Alex, I hope I was able to make a lot of sense.
Yes, there's a lot of sense. Yeah, very, very understood. Yeah.
Okay, Vincent has a question. Vincent says, ideally, how long should the literature review be? How long should the literature review be?
Okay, so for the degree students, you are doing between 16,000 words to 18,000. No, I think between 12,000 to 16 or 18,000 words. Yeah, that is your limit. So when you break these things down, you should know what each chapter is supposed to have, right? Because you do a lot of writing. So mostly for your level, the undergraduate level, I actually recommend that you do between 6,000 to 8,000 words for your literature review alone, because you need to review more literature. Now for the diploma students, between 4,000 to 6,000 words, because yours is a term paper and not necessarily an actual research paper like what the literature student and the degree students are actually doing. All right.
All right, so Vincent, your question has been answered, I suppose. Any other questions before we wrap up for this session? Okay, Vincent says his question has been answered. Okay, in the absence of further questions, Mr. Asitanga, would you like to say something to wrap up for this session?
Yeah, in conclusion, research is not an easy task. right? You may face a lot of problems, especially in drafting your literature review. But know that, with the more you write, the more you become experienced. Okay, perfect practice makes perfect. That is my principle to everything I do. Perfect practice makes perfect. So with every setback that you face, just keep on pushing and take into consideration most of these things I've told you. Now, also try to read as much as possible. You can go to the school's library. There are other research works that have been done. You can go through their literature review, find out how they drafted. Just not just works that are related to yours, but just generally take anybody's work, okay? Anybody who has completed work, look at just look at how they drafted it. Look at the different techniques that different people have used. Okay, try and borrow, because that's how research works. You borrow from most of these techniques and you add to yours to spice it up. So the more you practice, the more literature you review, the more knowledgeable you become, and the more perfect. There's no such thing as a perfect literature review. So maybe when we have enough time in the due course of the week, we can just have one section to look at chapters 3, 4, and 5. Those ones are not so difficult.
Okay. Hello.
Yeah.
Hello.
Yeah, please. The URLs that you said you would drop.
The what?
Did I say I'll drop it?
Hey, no, the other guy. What's his
Please.
ABDULAI.
Yeah, ABDULAI SAAKA. Remedy.
Said
Yeah.
you drop some URLs
So yes.
for the plagiarism checker.
Yeah. So what I'm going to do is after
Hey,
this.
I didn't talk about plagiarism. Oh, jeez.
So what I'm going to do is I'm going to drop.
Dominic, the site is not free. It's still paid for. There's no trial version or whatever.
Yeah, I know, but try downloading, turn it in. You
As a software.
Come again.
The software or an
Hello?
application or their site, just their
It's
site.
a software. It's a software. There's a site too. I'll try and get the name. And it's a software. There's a site too you can use, and sometimes Grammarly equally helps with the plagiarism.
Yeah.
But the reason why most of these plagiarism checkers are not available, it's not just for grammatical errors, and so you can actually use it also to check.
Really, I haven't seen that function.
Yeah, it exists. So just that it's.
I'll let you guys know in the course. But mostly the plagiarism checkers are for the institutions, because they need to check the level of plagiarism of your work.
Yeah.
So mostly it's made for them. So they pay for it.
Okay.
And they register. So what I am using.
Yeah, but okay.
Vincent is asking if
that is why I taught you guys how to avoid plagiarism. You understand? How to avoid it.
Okay.
The minimal level. So if you try and incorporate most of these things, you'll be able to avoid them.
All right. So I'll drop.
But you want the software, so
I'll drop my number.
And I can't give you access because the access is based on the institution. Yes. So we use it at the final lap of your project work. So as at now, your supervisor is not checking for plagiarism. So you